You can't just show up to your therapy sessions and tell yourself that it's changing your life. You have to take some responsibility and accountability and action on your own end. Investing time and effort into bettering yourself outside of your sessions is going to help you gain so much more from going to therapy. Welcome to Ebbs and Flows with Erin. In this show, we're getting real about navigating the ups and downs of life together. I'm your host, Erin, and we're ditching the pressure to have it all figured out along the way because honestly, nobody does. We'll explore all things healing, growing, creating, and connecting. And if you deal with anxiety, depression, being a highly sensitive person, or just feeling overwhelmed by life sometimes, I see you, and this show is for you. My intention with these conversations is simple: to leave you feeling empowered, validated, and most importantly, reminded that you are never alone, no matter where you're at on your own journey. Learning that we all have the power to heal genuinely changed my life. And the best part, healing does not have to be complicated. The smallest changes really can make the biggest impact, and it can be joyful, fulfilling, and something that we do together. So join me in getting real about what it means to heal. Thank you for being here, and now let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to Ebbs and Flows with Erin, or welcome back to Ebbs and Flows with Erin. Whether you are listening or watching over on YouTube, I, as always, am grateful to have you here with me today. Today, we are going to talk about how you can find the right therapist for you, why you shouldn't give up on therapy if you're not connecting with your therapist, and most importantly, how to get the most out of every single therapy session. This is something that I have felt called to talk about because of my experience with therapy and my journey to finding my therapist that I really connect with and gain value from every single session I have with her. After going to consistent therapy, at first bi-weekly and then monthly for the past 2.5 years, there are tips that I can share that I have found to make sure that I get the most out of every single therapy session. You're going to need to do some of the work yourself to make sure that you are getting the most out of these sessions and actually experiencing healing, growth, whatever it is you're looking for in therapy. So in this episode, we're going to talk about some tips to help you find the right therapist for you and encourage you to not give up on therapy if you're not connecting with your therapist or you don't feel like you're getting what you are looking to be getting out of it. And then, most importantly, giving you tips to make the most out of every single therapy session. For me personally, it was a journey over a few years to finding my therapist that I really connect with and that I really feel that I gain value from after each session. I've been actually able to see the positive impact, healing, and growth that's taken place in large part due to attending therapy with my therapist. But it was a journey to get there. I went through probably about 6 different counselors or therapists before I found my current one. And up until then, across a span of about 4 years, I had dabbled in therapy or counseling with a few different counselors through a free resource I had access to with my work, which I was blessed to have access to, but those were more so for short-term guidance and help, which just wasn't the fit for me. But that's where I started dabbling my toes in this world. And throughout that time period, I definitely still had the underlying subconscious mindset of, well, I should be someone who doesn't need therapy. I shouldn't need therapy to navigate my life. And I know I had that subconscious mindset because at that time, throughout that time, I felt very uncomfortable with the thought of anyone finding out that I was going to counseling. And I didn't really talk about it, which is kind of funny to look back at now that I talk about my mental health therapy and whatnot very, very openly on platforms such as this now. But I do think it's really good to see that a lot of society is moving towards the mindset that you don't necessarily need to have anything wrong with you, quote unquote, to go to therapy, and therapy is something that can be positive and beneficial for any human. But yeah, I tried about 3 or 4 counseling situations through this free resource with work over a couple of years, and those just didn't pan out. I didn't feel like I was gaining much from them. It just wasn't really a fit for me. Then I took about a year off any form of therapy, and then it wasn't long before I found my current therapist that I remember it very vividly. I was in a anxious spiral and I was really desperate, and so I had been hearing about this BetterHelp online therapy option, which sounded really good to me because A, we all know therapy is expensive and it can be not very accessible depending where you're looking or what you're looking for. And so I remember I was quite desperate in this moment and I signed up for BetterHelp, and it seemed like it was going to be a godsend because A, you don't have to leave your house, you can do it from anywhere, schedule it anytime, and it was very cost effective. But long story short, I ended up getting a refund from BetterHelp because I shared with them my disappointment and my experience with them and their platform. I had tried 4 different counselor therapists, and they were counselors. And in a minute here, we're going to get into the difference between a counselor and a psychologist. We'll get into that. But I tried 4 different therapist counselors on BetterHelp. 2 of them stood me up, didn't show up to the appointments. And then the other 2 were just insanely unprofessional and gave me some whack advice, for lack of a better term, where I ended the appointments feeling like, was I just being punked? What the hell was that? Yeah, that was wild. And so I emailed BetterHelp and I shared this with them. I'm like, first of all, 2 of your therapists never showed up to my appointments. 2 of them, I don't know, no offense to them, but like how they got here. And I shared some examples of, what I experienced with them. And I do have to say, BetterHelp immediately fully refunded me. I think you pay for like a month at a time. They fully refunded me. So I don't know. Every time I listen to a podcast now, there's always BetterHelp advertisements, and I just personally cannot co-sign the BetterHelp therapy route. And I don't know if it's different now, but at the time, again, it was more so counselors, which very valuable and beneficial depending on what you're looking for in your therapy, which we're going to get into a minute here. But for me, and part of it is definitely on me. I was very desperate at the moment of signing up for BetterHelp. And if I had really looked into it more and had a clearer picture of what was being offered with it, I might have explored other options and not signed up for it because, again, it wasn't really for me. Yeah, but they gave me a refund very quickly and apologized for my experience. So, yeah, I just know there is not a world where I will be getting BetterHelp ads on this podcast. Because, yeah, can't say that my experience was a positive one. Okay, I also want to mention quickly here, I was trying to be strong and make it through this episode without having to say anything, but I am dealing with a bit of a sinus throat situation right now, so I apologize if this is not that pleasant to listen to. I have had to pause and sneeze like 4 times so far, but that's the situation. I'm a mouth breather currently. I hope this mic is not picking up my mouth breathing too much. But yeah, once I experienced that with BetterHelp, and I had signed up for it in this desperation, anxious spiral, depression zone I was in at the time, I decided and declared to myself, okay, I don't care what it costs, we're going to go the avenue of a psychologist. We are going to seek out a licensed psychologist and try out therapy going that direction. And I found my girl, and I cried after my first appointment leaving because I was like, oh my god, this is what I've been searching for. And I have been so grateful for her ever since. So now I feel very passionately about spreading the message that I know it can feel defeating trying to find help that is the fit for you, but you will and you can, and there is someone who is going to be able to support you in the way that you need to be supported. So in sharing a bit about my story with my journey in finding the right therapist for me, I want to give you these tips and save you some of the time and effort that they would have saved me if I had been aware of them along my journey. I maybe could have got to the point of finding the right therapist for me a little bit sooner, but I learned the long way, and now I can share these tips for you so you don't have to. Okay, so this leads us into tips to help you find the right therapist for you. So, number one, most important, is you need to identify your needs. So, what is it that you are looking to go to therapy for? Do you have a specific struggle in mind that you want to address, or a specific life event? Are you wanting help with processing your emotions? Is it grief? Is it trauma? Are you looking for growth or improvement or accountability? Do you just want to be able to dump out your thoughts and feelings and talk to someone who is third party and unbiased? Are you looking for opinions and advice, or are you looking for research, science-based facts, tools? So this is going to be number one, most important step, really pinpointing what your needs are and what it is you're looking to address in therapy, because most of the time, any of these professionals are going to have some sort of bio sharing the areas that they specialize in, the types of therapies that they offer. So, knowing what you're looking for is going to help you in finding a therapist that can fulfill those needs. This is where I struggled along my journey for a while because I was looking for longer term, deeper support where I could work through many, many, many different things over time and unpack and process things throughout going back to childhood all the way up till current life. And this is where I was coming up with struggles when I was seeing these different counselors in the beginning, because the counseling that I was attending was more so for short-term support. And not only short-term, but for more specific, direct to one situation, one event, one struggle. And there are so many different kinds of therapy or therapists. There's grief therapists, there's trauma therapists, couples therapists, divorce counselors, addictions counselors, there's cognitive behavioral therapy, there's art therapy. There's so many different types of therapy, therapists, counselors, and it can be overwhelming. So the first step, if you can identify what you are looking for before you dive into your search for a therapist, it's going to help you more efficiently be able to highlight and explore the professionals who offer support in a way that fulfills the needs that you have identified. Okay, and this is a really important part, as I've been mentioning counselor versus my psychologist now. And there's nothing wrong with any of these titles or these professionals, and I'm going to read these directly from Psychology Today because I don't want to paraphrase or get it wrong. But we're going to talk about the difference between a counselor, a psychologist, and who is called a therapist. And it's going to help this, I hope, make a little bit more sense, be a little bit more clear. Okay, so a psychologist has a doctoral degree, such as a doctorate in philosophy, a PhD, or a doctorate in psychology. A psychologist's training may delve more deeply into the science, theory, and practice of psychology and human behavior. They may be more likely to treat mental illness. They can conduct psychological and neuropsychological testing. Outside of a clinical context, a psychologist may also be a researcher in an academic or institutional setting. So this, when I read it, made so much sense for me in why, if I knew the difference between these and had identified my exact needs going into my search on this journey to finding my therapist, I would have probably steered towards a licensed psychologist sooner, because I always say my favorite thing about my therapist, my psychologist, is that she only gives me tools or advice when they are backed by research or science. Just like this definition shared, that a psychologist's training may delve more deeply into the science, theory, and practice of psychology and human behavior. So keeping that in mind, we'll move on to counseling or counselors. Counseling tends to be shorter term, goal oriented, and it addresses concrete, specific life challenges. By contrast, therapy with other professionals tends to be longer term, more exploratory and holistic, and treats mental illness. So that, again, is something that if I had read into this back in the beginning of my journey, well, I don't know. Me now, this version of me would clearly identify that my needs would fit with someone of a psychologist level, but maybe I wouldn't have recognized that back then. I don't know. Everything's easier to say in hindsight, but that makes a lot of sense. If you are looking, like I said, to address a specific challenge, a specific event, this is a short-term solution for something that has or is going on in your life. Counseling may be the route you decide to go. They go on to say counselors often specialize in a specific area such as marriage, addiction, grief, or abuse. For example, drug and alcohol counseling is a common form of counseling in which certified individuals help clients recover from alcohol and substance use disorders. Common degrees for counselors include licensed mental health counselor and licensed professional counselor. According to the American Counseling Association, professional counselors help people gain personal insights, develop strategies, and come up with real-life solutions to the problems and challenges we all face in every area of life. As trained and credentialed professionals, they accomplish this by getting to know clients, by building safe, positive relationships, and suggesting tools and techniques they believe will benefit clients. So, I believe that makes it pretty clear the difference between counseling and therapy with a psychologist, and there's nothing wrong with either. It's all about your needs and what you specifically are looking to address. But it's useful information to know and will definitely help you in finding the right therapist for you. On top of that, they gave a definition of therapist because therapist is an overarching term for a clinician who treats mental health concerns. It often applies and is colloquially, I can't say that word, I know it, colloquially used. I hope you guys know what that means. As a label for each of these three categories. For example, therapists often have a master's degree, but a psychologist with a doctorate degree may also be called a therapist. So just making you aware that the term therapist can be used for many of these professionals. And when you are on your search, you will often see in their bios on their website, they will specify exactly their credentials. I just wanted to read those definitions to make it more clear and give you an idea of the difference between a psychologist and a counselor. And most importantly, the good news here is that there is an option for everyone. There are so many options when it comes to finding someone that you can talk to and seek support from. All of these options, all of these professionals, all of these offerings are valuable. They are all just different in what they can offer you, and it's up to you to decipher what it is you're looking for. But on that note, another tip is give it some trial and error and stay open to the possibility that it might take you a few different tries with a few different therapists, psychologists, counselors. It might take you a few different tries to find the one that you really connect with or that you feel like you're getting the most out of your sessions with them. Allow it to take trial and error. I know it can feel defeating or exhausting when you're like, oh my gosh, I have to meet another person and open up about my life to another person, but I encourage you to do so. You will find what you're looking for, and it will be worth it. Okay, so these tips we've talked about for finding the right therapist for you. Number one, identify your needs. What is it that you're looking to address in therapy? What is it you're looking to get out of it? Number two, familiarize yourself with the difference between what a psychologist may offer and what a counselor may offer, and the fact that the term therapist can be used for the range of these professionals. So you're going to want to do your research in who it is you are booking sessions with, read their bios, if you need to call or email the clinics, ask questions. Tip 3 is be open to trial and error. Be open to the fact that it might take you a few different tries with a few different professionals to land on one that you're really clicking with. Tip number 3 is be open to trial and error. So try and stay open to the fact that it might not be the first professional that you go to that is going to be the one that lands and you connect with. Allow yourself to explore your options. I would give it a 2-session try at least. You will likely know in your gut, in your intuition at this point, if this is a therapist that you are connecting with, but also really tune into, is this that I'm not connecting with them, or is it that I'm feeling a little bit vulnerable in therapy? Is a part of me wanting to back out of therapy or not allow myself to go deep and really open up this journey? Make sure that you aren't using the fact that you're not connecting with a therapist as a way to get yourself out of really taking therapy by the reins and giving it a go. That being said, also don't feel like you have to stick it out if you're not connecting with them. This is your time, your effort, your money. If you want to try seeing a new therapist, you can do that. This is about you getting the most out of your therapy sessions. On that note, let's move on to how to make the most out of each therapy session. Okay, my first tip here is to reflect before each session. So take some time to think about what has been going on, what has been coming up for you, either since your last session or recently. And sometimes this is really obvious. You know immediately what you want to be addressing. And other times it'll be harder to come up with what exactly you want to talk about. And a lot of the time it seems like these sessions where you go in being like, I don't really know what I'm going to talk about, these end up being the ones where you leave thinking, wow, that was so good. So that just goes to say again, like, you don't have to necessarily have something wrong with you or a big problem to address for therapy to be beneficial. A lot of my favorite sessions have been ones where I've went in with not really a specific struggle or issue to address, but I left being like, wow, that was so good. So try not putting too much pressure on yourself going into each session, feeling like you have to come up with some big issue to address. You really don't. Trust me, you'll go in there and, I mean, if, again, it's the right therapist for you, you will address some shit and it'll be beneficial and you'll leave being happy that you went. But on this note as well, a tip to help with this, so I know for myself, if I just leave it to my brain alone to remember things that came up throughout either the week or the month or whatever it was since I last went to therapy, I will forget things. And they could be things that previously in certain moments pop in my head and I'm like, okay, I need to address this in therapy. And then when I'm reflecting before my session, I forget about it. And then I'm mad at myself because I forgot that I wanted to talk about that in therapy. So my suggestion for this, which is now what I have been doing for the past 2 years, is to keep a note on your phone. Keep an active note on your phone. Jot things down anytime something pops up that you want to bring up in therapy. Instead of just leaving it to right before your session when you're trying to reflect and think of what to bring up, you can go to this note on your phone and you can see exactly what you want to bring up, what has been coming up for you, and you don't have to rely on your brain to remember everything, because sometimes things will come up and in the moment it seems like, oh my god, I need to bring that up in therapy. But trust me, your brain will not always remember that when the session comes. So you're adding to this note in real time whenever something comes up for you, whenever you think of something or are triggered by something, put it into your phone. And then in this little reflection session before your therapy session, you look to that note in your phone and you see, okay, this is what I want to bring up in this session today. And my next tip is immediately after your session, you want to write reflection notes again, whether it's in your journal, your notebook, or your phone. I say immediately after because sometimes you might leave your session and think, oh, I'll write all this down when I get home. But at least for myself, even if it's a short drive to get home, by the time I'm there is likely stuff that my brain has probably already forgotten. So I will, as soon as I get in my car after the session, I go on my notes app and I write out all my reflections for my session. While it's all fresh in my brain, everything from things that I talked about, tools that my therapist gave me, research that she gave me, all my key takeaways that she gave me. So there are kind of 3 sections to this post-session reflection note that I keep. The first section is I jot down everything I talked about, or the themes of what I talked about. The next section of the note is key takeaways. So any tools or research or anything my therapist said or shared with me that stood out, I write that down there. The third section of this note is action items. So how am I going to implement any of the things that she shared with me? What am I going to do following this session to put the things I've learned in action? So this is where you are helping yourself to get the absolute most out of every therapy session, because you're immediately creating an action plan and you're cementing in your mind everything that you just learned and creating, most importantly, a plan going forward, or what you would like to do, how you would like to implement the things you learned today into your life. Because it can be really easy to fall into the cycle of book a therapy session, show up, leave, book another one, show up, leave. And if you're just showing up to your session and then leaving and expecting that your therapist is changing your life, you are absolutely not going to get the most out of your therapy sessions. And this is where I believe a lot of the conversation and even debate sometimes around talk therapy being effective comes up, because there's been more awareness about, like I often talk about in this podcast, things like working with your nervous system, your body, somatic healing, nervous system regulation. You have to work with your body in order to actually heal and process, grow, change, which is a fact. But talk therapy is still extremely beneficial. It's when you're just showing up to talk therapy and not doing any of the work outside of the session that it's probably not going to do what you're wanting it to do. In my opinion and experience, you have to do the work as well. You can't just rely on your therapist to change your life by showing up to your sessions. You have to be putting in the work, putting in effort to identifying things that you want to share in therapy, and then implementing the expertise that is shared with you into your own life and doing the work in your own life outside of therapy to put that all to use. And that's where you'll experience real healing and growth and changing yourself. So I got a little bit ahead of myself, because that was my next tip, was to do the work outside of your session. This is why things are said like you can't force anyone to want to change. You can't force anyone to go to therapy, because if you're going to therapy but not being completely open to the process and committed to investing effort into the process, then it's not going to do much for you. You can't just show up to your therapy sessions and tell yourself that it's changing your life. You have to take some responsibility and accountability and action on your own end. Investing time and effort into bettering yourself outside of your sessions is going to help you gain so much more from going to therapy. Okay, my next tip is to ask questions, or don't be afraid to ask questions to your therapist. You're allowed to ask them questions as well. You want to make sure that you feel clear and confident in your relationship with them. So if you have questions, ask them. I know it can feel intimidating, but this can help you to form a stronger connection with your therapist, or become more clear on if this is the right fit for you in the first place. Okay, another tip, I believe I mentioned this already, want to mention it again to get the most out of your sessions. Don't put too much pressure on it. So don't feel like you have to go in with a big problem to benefit from therapy. Every human can benefit from going to therapy. There's always more to learn and know about bettering yourself, healing and growing. And don't let anyone make you feel like there's something wrong for you for going to therapy, because there is absolutely not. Okay, my final tip here is to set boundaries around therapy. So for myself personally, I am open about the fact that I go to therapy. I'm open about themes that I talk about in therapy with ebbs and flows. I like to share things that I've learned from therapy from my therapist. But these are tools and research and science-based facts that I share. I'm not sharing the intimate, private details of what I'm discussing in therapy about my life, and I don't suggest sharing the details of your therapy sessions with others, but deciding and knowing what your boundaries are around therapy is going to help you when And if someone asks you about it, having a response in your mind of what you're going to say when someone asks, and you might hear this and think, why would anyone ever ask that? Just trust me, people might ask you. And it will be helpful to have a response in your head, a boundary in your mind of what you're going to say so that it doesn't fluster you, throw you off, make you feel any sort of type of way, or have you maybe panic and like overshare. If you're someone who subconsciously overshares sometimes when they get flustered or overwhelmed, having this boundary in your mind, maybe you don't want to share that you go to therapy. Maybe you're open to sharing that you go to therapy, but you don't want to talk about anything you talk about in therapy, which is very healthy. You don't have to, and I don't encourage you to. But knowing what you're going to say in response to therapy, know that that is a very personal journey and experience. And if someone else is open to sharing their experiences in therapy, it doesn't mean that you have to be. Set your boundary with it and know that whatever boundary you decide on is the right one for you, no matter how it is received. Okay, I hope that this was a helpful guide to finding the right therapist for you, making the most out of your therapy sessions, encouraging you to not give up on therapy if you haven't found a therapist that you connect with yet. I promise you, you will find your support and it will be worth it. To quickly sum up what we talked about, the tips for how to find the right therapist for you. Number 1, identify your needs, what you're looking to address in therapy. Number 2, identify the difference between a psychologist, a counselor, and a therapist. Number 3, be open to some trial and error in finding the right therapist for you. Number 4, do not give up on your journey with therapy if you're not connecting with therapists so far. And then tips for how to make the most out of each therapy session. Number 1, reflect beforehand. Number 2, keep a note on your phone where you are in real time writing down things that come up for you that you would like to address in therapy so that you can look to that when you are reflecting before your session on what to bring up. Number 3, reflect immediately after your session, before you even go home. Make notes immediately about, number 1, what you talked about. Number 2, main takeaways, tools, advice, knowledge, anything that you took away from your session. And number 3, action items. How are you going to put what you learned or talked about today in action so that you can experience some real change and healing and growth? And on that note, with these notes, this also helps to foster self-confidence, self-love, self-trust, because you can look back at these notes and see how far you've come in all the things that you've addressed in therapy. And it's a really powerful tool. Okay, number 4, I think, tip here was ask questions to your therapist. Number 5, do the work outside of the session. Number 6, don't put too much pressure on it. And number 7, set boundaries around therapy. I hope that I was able to provide some sort of value here. I have paused to sneeze probably 17 times. So may have lost my train of thought. I hope that this all flows together. If you have any questions, as always, please feel free to reach out to me on Instagram at ebbsandflows222 or email me at erinebbsandflows@gmail.com. Leave me a comment on YouTube, a review on Apple Podcasts, all the things. I appreciate you guys so much for listening, watching, connecting with me. I am sending a lot of love and gratitude, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.